Every one of these stories starts the same way. One guy, alone, and an entire police force that cannot catch him. Today, it's three of the biggest manhunts in Canadian history. One lasted 7 weeks in temperatures of 40 below. One lasted 19 months and ended with a cannon. And one lasted 13 years and ended in a courtroom nobody saw coming. These are Canada's greatest manhunts. In July 1931, a quiet stranger walked into Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories, gave his name as Albert Johnson, and built himself a cabin out on the Rat River. Nobody knows if that was his real name. By December, local trappers were complaining somebody was messing with their trap lines. 2 officers went out and asked him about it. He wouldn't even talk to them, wouldn't look at them, just stared. They came back 5 days later with a warrant. Johnson answered the door with a rifle and shot the constable through it. So now, the RCMP had a posse, 9 men, 42 dogs, and 40 pounds of dynamite they had to thaw out by holding it inside their coats against their bodies because it was too cold to use it straight out of the box. They surrounded the cabin and threw the dynamite onto the roof. The whole thing blew apart, walls caving in, roof gone. Johnson stood up out of a foxhole he had dug underneath the floor and just kept firing. After 15 hours and 700 rounds of ammunition, the posse had to retreat. They never even got close enough to drag him out. Then it got worse. A few weeks later, Johnson killed a second officer in a firefight in the bush. By now, this is front page news across the entire country. People glued to their radios for updates. Here's how strange the chase got. The RCMP had never used an airplane in a manhunt before. They brought in a bush pilot named Wilfred Wap May, who'd flown fighter planes in World War I, the same dogfight where the Red Baron went down. May spent weeks scanning the frozen rivers from the air for Johnson's trail. At one point, with the entire Richardson Mountains blocked off by police, Johnson climbed a 7,000-foot peak alone in a blizzard and vanished over the other side into the Yukon. He went 48 days, 240 kilometers on foot, 40 below. Then, on February 17, 1932, May spotted fresh tracks from the air along the Eagle River and radioed it down to the ground team. They caught up to him on a bend in the frozen river. Johnson dropped to the snow and opened fire one more time. It took 9 bullets to put him down. Nobody ever figured out who he really was. His fingerprints matched nothing. No family ever came forward to claim the body. He never said a single word the entire 7 weeks. In 2007, a forensic team actually dug him up looking for DNA answers. They still don't know who he was. His rifle and snowshoes are still sitting in a glass case in the RCMP museum in Regina today. Hollywood's made at least 2 movies out of his story, and neither one could tell you his real name either. If you think outrunning the RCMP through an Arctic blizzard is wild, wait to hear about the manhunt that ended with an army hauling out an actual cannon. In October 1895, north of Duck Lake, Saskatchewan, a young Cree man named Almighty Voice was arrested for butchering a government steer. His people were starving. The cow had wandered onto their land, and he figured that was the end of it. Then a guard joked he'd be hanged for it. Almighty Voice didn't know it was a joke. That same night, he slipped out through a window, ran 6 miles, swam across the ice-cold South Saskatchewan River, and kept running another 14 miles back to his mother's lodge. A week later, Sergeant Colin Colebrook tracked him down. Almighty Voice warned him to stay back. Colebrook came forward anyway. Almighty Voice shot and killed him. The government put a $500 bounty on his head and even arrested his own father, hoping it would smoke him out. His name itself, now forgive me for my pronunciation, Kichimanituwaya, meant voice of the Great Spirit. People said his voice was so deep and resonant it felt like the Creator himself was speaking through him. Nobody collected that reward for 19 months. Here's what made it last so long. His own community always knew exactly where he was, hunting, moving through the bush around the reserve, completely protected. Nobody ever turned him in. But then, in May 1897, Almighty Voice and 2 relatives wounded a scout near Duck Lake. That tip was real, and the police finally had a location. And a patrol of 12 men found the 3 of them dug into a pit in a thicket of poplar trees in the Mini Chinas Hills. They opened fire on the police. An inspector and sergeant went down, badly wounded. When local volunteers tried to storm the position, 3 more men died trying, including the local postmaster, who wasn't even police, just a civilian who volunteered. So Regina sent in artillery, a 7-pound field gun, plus over 100 reinforcements. For 2 days and 1 night, they shelled that little stand of trees. Almighty Voice's own mother sat on a nearby hillside the entire time, watching, singing his death song while guns kept firing. When it finally went quiet, they swept the bluff and found all 3 of them dead in the pits they had dug. He was only 22 years old. To this day, there are families on that reserve who still carry the name Almighty Voice. There's even a film about him from the 70s, with Donald Sutherland playing the Mountie who finally tracked him down. Both of those men died at the end of their manhunts. This last one's different. This one, the guy actually wins. In June 1906, a respected Gitxsan businessman named Simon Gunanoot stopped for a drink at a rough little roadhouse near Hazelton, British Columbia. He owned a store. He had a wife and kids. People in town liked him. That night, he got into it with 2 men, a packer named Alec McIntosh and a hunting guide named Max Leclerc. Witnesses heard him saying he'd come back to them and fix them. A few hours later, both men turned up dead on a trail outside of town, shot. Police rode straight to Gunanoot's ranch. He and his brother-in-law were already gone. Here's the part that turned this into a 13-year legend. The posse tracked them to a nearby village, but somehow all their horses got loose overnight, and they had to walk 25 miles back home. By the time they returned with new horses, Gunanoot had already circled back, grabbed his wife and children, and disappeared into the bush completely. The province offered a reward. Nobody ever collected it. Eventually, they brought in the Pinkerton Detective Agency out of Seattle, sent 2 undercover men up to Hazelton, disguised as prospectors. They failed too. Through it all, Gunanoot kept trapping in the wilderness and quietly selling his furs through a friend back in town. People up there, indigenous and settlers both, mostly liked the guy. Nobody wanted to turn him in. By 1914, the local police constable just took the wanted poster down and decided to wait him out. It took 5 more years. In July 1919, Gunanoot finally sent word through his friend that he was ready to surrender, but only after he hired the best criminal lawyer in the province. He spent 1 more winter out in the bush, trapping enough furs to actually pay for the legal fees himself. Then, on October 24th, 1919, he said goodbye to his wife and kids, walked into Hazelton Police Station, and told the officer there, "I've come to fight my case." While he sat in custody waiting for trial, the local constable actually left his cell door unlocked and let him work in the garden outside. One woman walked by and saw him out there holding a large knife and panicked, convinced the famous outlaw had escaped. He was just thinning the vegetables. His trial in Vancouver drew national headlines. The courtroom gallery was packed. The jury was out for 10 minutes. Not guilty. Simon Gunanoot walked free after 13 years on the run. His brother-in-law surrendered the following year and was cleared too. Gunanoot went home to Hazelton and lived another 14 years before he passed away out on the trails in 1933. A friend who knew him put it simply afterward: there was nothing bad about him. 48 days in the Arctic, 19 months and a cannon, 13 years and a 10-minute jury. 3 of the biggest manhunts this country has ever seen, and only one of those men ever got to go home. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe for more True North Heists. We put out one every weekday. Which of these 3 would you have made a bet on surviving? Let me know in the comments, and thanks again.